I'm delighted to be joined by Mark C Crowley in conversation this evening. Mark is, well, a senior executive for a number of decades. He's also an executive coach. He's an author of a wonderful book about leading from the heart. And he's also a leadership podcast host, which actually extends into about 150 countries. Mark, you're very welcome.
Oh, what a joy to be with you, Sean.
And it's even more joy, Mark, because I hear there's Irish lineage there with a name like Crowley. There has to be some Irish there. So
Very much so.
it's a double welcome to the podcast and to
Yeah,
the
we
to the
were
series.
Oak Crowley at one point of time, I think.
Well, it's great to talk to you, Mark. Mark, it's probably a very prescient time to be speaking about leadership, and it strikes me that leadership has always been greedy work, and it's hard work because it's heart work. Would you agree with that?
It is if you do it right. You know, if you're really investing yourself in people. I remember in my career, Sean, just coming home on Friday night and just passing out because you're just so tired from, just investing in people. But that's where the returns come from too, right? It's making those investments. So if it's hard work, it's hard work. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. But if you just manage people as if they're, you know, interchangeable parts in the process and you don't really connect with them, then that's not the kind of leadership that I advocate for. But moreover, it's not the kind of leadership that even works.
So people are very much to the center of and to the essence and to the core of what makes a leader tick.
I would agree. Completely.
Mark, what's the secret sauce of a highly performing leader in terms of getting the best rather than the stress out of their teams?
Sean, it's interesting because 5 minutes before we started talking, I saw this new report from McKinsey. And keep in mind, McKinsey is an organization that is hard nosed, and I've worked with them before. They tend to be all here and not here. And that's been their reputation for a really long time. But in light of the fact that 30 million people in America have quit their jobs in the last 7 months here, it's a phenomenal thing that's happening. And of course, COVID's driving it. And companies are looking at solve it. Like, how do we keep people from leaving? And so they're, can I give you a little more dough, Sean? As if that's going to solve it. So McKinsey came out and said, it really boils down to you need managers to pivot, to begin to really truly care about their people, to create a sense of belonging, to give people an opportunity for growth, a sense of connection and community. That's all hard. Every bit of it is hard. So when I read this, I'm thinking we're at the tipping point. If McKinsey is finally coming around to saying that we need to bring heart into leadership.
Where does servant leadership sit with you as a principle?
The very first time I spoke, somebody asked me that, and I didn't even know what it was. So because I've just been in my own bubble. I've just been managing people. I'm not a big fan of the language of servant leadership, to be honest with you, even though I understand the fundamentals of it are very much aligned to what I'm talking about. The thing is that leadership has two objectives. One is you got to drive performance, or you're not going to stay in the job. So what typically happens is the managers get so focused on that they don't focus on people. And then if you focus on people, then they think, well, you don't know how to drive performance. So it becomes this binary choice. You're either going to be the guy who's going to push people to get numbers, or you're going to be the guy who cares and you're going to fail. And really the solution is that you need to do both. That the caring, the supporting, the nurturing, which all sounded like ridiculous ideas when I first wrote my book, are now becoming so obviously necessary because of what COVID has done to people and how it's opened up their minds and hearts to what really matters in life. And working for a boss who doesn't really care about them is simply no longer going to sustain them. And until we fundamentally change how we think about leadership, and by the way, Sean, who we put into leadership roles, like if you don't have an inclination to care about the success and well-being of other people, then you shouldn't be managing people. So to your point about, servant leadership, that is the orientation, is that you're serving people. The challenge that I have with it is that it doesn't necessarily ignore, but inherently it takes the focus off. You've got to drive performance. And so it's really those two pieces in combination. I hope that's clear.
Your paradigm of leadership puts people first, and sometimes people sacrifice the people piece at the altar of performance. But what you're saying is actually cultivating and minding and looking after people. It's very much intrinsic to good quality leadership.
It is the essence of good quality leadership. And so the thing is that none of this is like theoretical to me. I managed people my entire career and then came back and wrote the book, and then came back and found out that there was all sorts of science that validated why people scaled mountains for me, which all relate to the heart, of course. Now you have a boss that says, Sean, how was your day? How's your weekend? How's your family? Tell me what's going on. What are the challenges? How can I help you? By the way, what's going on with your aspirations? Like, tell me what you want to accomplish at work and how I can support that. All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute. My boss cares about that. He cares about my children and knows their names and wants to know what my dreams are of work. That's where this whole idea of reciprocity comes in. Like, I can't wait to give you good performance because you are really wonderful to me as a manager.
And what if somebody responds to you with that, Mark, by saying, I'm just not a people person, I'm a process person. That personal piece is not really my bag.
You shouldn't be in a leadership role. It's really clear to me. Like I if it were you, I would say, hey, Sean, let's find something where, and by the way, I think organizations have done a really poor job of creating a career path for somebody who is a great architect or a great salesperson, right? A great pharmacist, what have you. And then you say, well, you're so good as a salesperson, we're going to put you into a management role. And the whole thing that drives somebody to be a great salesperson, the motivation of somebody who's a great salesperson tends to be very self-focused, very competitive, wants to knock other people down, isn't interested in collaboration or cooperation or sharing ideas. So then we go, but you're number one, so you're going to be able to go over there and you're going to make everybody else magnificent. And we bring them over there, and the people hate working for that person because they haven't changed their stripes. They don't want, they say they're supposed to be coaching their salespeople, but they don't, because they're like, well, I spent 5 years learning this. You should spend the same 5 years. And that's like completely antithetical about what we need in a manager role. We need somebody who's a generous coach. And it's interesting. Gallup has sort of proved that, I call it a caring gene, like literally genetics. So you were saying, what if you're a process person? What Gallup has shown is that it's really only 1 in 3 people on the planet that have an inclination to really care about how other people are doing. It's like, I'm just interested in this conversation because it's going to advance my career. I don't really care about you. Versus, I just am interested in people and I want to know about you and I want to make this as good for you. As that is only 1/3 of the population. So when you think about in America, for example, that only 1/3 of workers are engaged, and then you think, well, only 1/3 of people in management roles are likely to be caring people. It's sort of predictable in my mind, right? So again, it goes back to your question about servant leadership. You need to know how to get performance out of people. My experience is the more you care about them, the more they're going to show initiative. And the more they're going to do to perform because they want to reciprocate. And the coolest thing is that you can actually raise the bar on people, not in a negative way, but in an aspirational way. It's like, if I'm going to do all of this to support you, if I'm going to coach you and train you and teach you and appreciate you and make you feel safe and cared for and nurtured, when you get into that state, you're just marinating in positive emotions and you can perform optimally that way. So at that point, you say, well, let's do something bigger than what you would normally do. So I used to just elevate the goals and say, let's aim much higher. And so we were always number one. We were always doing great things, and people felt really good about themselves because they were doing exceptional work. And that's a big part of meaning and fulfillment and purpose. So they all go hand in hand.
I was speaking to a leader last week, and he said that he never says no to a nativity play. So, because family is a value that's very important and it's reciprocated in loyalty and commitment. What are the underlying values, Mark, that underpin your own leadership perspective and strategy?
So when you say the nativity, is you're saying that never turn an employee down to go to their children's nativity play, or
Yes, and he said
yeah.
unless there was a very pressing reason, he would always say yes.
Well, I mean, you're using the word reciprocate, so it's interesting, right? So you're already having that experience. But the thing is that they're more life events than a nativity play, you know. So they go to their Christmas show once a year, but what about their soccer, football games, and what about their teacher conferences, or you know, I think we have gotten to we had this fundamental belief, Sean, that people don't like work, and so we've got to keep the whip on them, you know. And we got to, and if anything, we saw during COVID that just wasn't the case. People really stepped up. So I used to tell people that work for me, like, I don't care when you come in, and I don't care when you go home. Like, that's not my concern. You want to go coach your kids' team? Great, go do it. What I am holding you accountable for are the results. So I'm holding you accountable to the performance, and how you go about and do it, I don't have any concern. So you go, well, you don't care what time they come in, but if you're managing a team of people and you come in at 11 o'clock every day, you're going to alienate those people who are there at 8 or 8:30, 7:30 or whatever. So if you're the manager of that team, even though I'm giving you permission to come in whenever you want to, it doesn't really, there's enough support from just life in general that you can't, right? It's not like you could come in at 11 and go home at 4 every day and still succeed, because it's not enough time in the day to do your job. It's not enough time to have credibility with your people. So what I found is that if you give people freedom, not just for nativity plays, but just freedom, just, I'm setting a bar high. These are my expectations. And whatever you do in order to get them, I'm totally fine with, as long as it's ethical, obviously. But what I'm really trying to say is that when you give people control over their lives, as opposed to, sort of imposing rules all the time, that you actually get greater performance, because people thrive when they have control, and they don't thrive when they don't have control.
How did you find difficult conversations?
Difficult. I mean, nobody likes to have them. But, it's interesting, because I have a friend who wrote a book called Radical Candor. And Kim Scott is her name. Very, very successful book. And when she was on my podcast, I said, why do you have to call it radical? And she said, I could have called it compassionate candor. But radical candor sells, because we think we need to be, in people's faces kind of a thing, and be aggressive. And where I land on this is compassionate candor is really where it's at. Like, so if you're not performing, let's just say you've been working for me for 6 months and you haven't met any of your goals. And I really have come to the conclusion that you're not performing, and that this might not be the role. So the difficult conversation is to tell you that. And so what I would say is, John, I've been trying to be really patient, and we've done a lot of coaching, a lot of training, and your performance just isn't measuring up to this role. Do you want to do this? Is this something that you want to keep doing? Because I'm happy to help transition you. I'll help support you, write a recommendation for you, not just say off you go, but literally help you to find something difficult, because I don't think this is good for you. What do you think? Now, that's a difficult thing to say to somebody, right? Really difficult. But it's honest, and it's direct, and it gives people clarity. Like, so you can think in that moment, my boss doesn't think I'm very good at this. So you can get, a flame up your rear end and say, know what, I'm going to prove to him. Or you can say, you know what, he's being truthful with me, and maybe it's time for me to start to think. And you've had 6 months to reflect on your own performance. So it's not like this is coming as a surprise. But it's when we go, it's not really doing that well. And then the next thing you know, you're in my office and I'm writing you up and, giving you last notice. And it just feels like, you know what, you could have been a little bit more clear here of what kind of a predicament I'm in. So I believe in directness. I believe in truth. But I also believe in doing it in a way that leaves the person standing and feeling respected.
So you can do that without compromising those core values of compassion and care and kindness.
Yeah. I mean, get the message out. Sean, you're not really performing well, and I'm wondering whether or not this is the best role for you. Done. Now it's all compassion. How do I help you? What can I do to make you succeed in this job or something else?
Was that always your approach, Mark, or did you have an epiphany on your leadership journey?
No, that's always been my approach. Yeah, I think you indicated that you read my book. So
Mm,
I had a rather unusual upbringing. My mom
mm,
died when I was very young. My father was psychologically and emotionally abusive,
mm,
and really kind of destroyed my self-esteem, and then kicked me out of the house with no finances and
mm,
no emotional support. So I kind of had to figure it out for myself and endure. And so when I started managing people, I realized, unconsciously, that the kinds of things that would have helped me be more successful upon graduating from college were things that I had missed out on, which were feeling safe, feeling supported, feeling like somebody had my back, feeling like somebody saw my worth and value and wanted to
mm,
elevate it, develop it. Somebody who really appreciated me, somebody who made me feel safe to the extent that they were willing to say, you know what, I'm so glad I chose you.
mm,
So I did all that unconsciously, but I did it from the very beginning. And I took all my success for granted because I thought everybody else was managing this way. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s where somebody had worked for me for 20 years just casually said, you manage people very differently, don't you?
mm,
And that all of a sudden put all the pieces together. And I started to realize that it was all shaped by how I was raised.
mm.
So had I not had that upbringing and that brutal experience for basically the first 22-3 years of my life, I don't think I would have ever been the person that I am today. And so really over time what I did was just refine it, because once I fully understood that I was affecting the hearts of people, then I wanted to understand how to do that better.
Mm.
And so I sort of perfected it, and then later wrote the book.
Is that a set of specific skills that can be learned and cultivated, Mark?
Yes, as long as you want to. So I just spoke to a law firm in Boston, Irishtown,
Mm,
and so everybody was engaged except for one attorney who happened to be a partner in the firm, who actually had two people quitting on the same day. So the very guy who would have benefited from paying attention to my presentation for an hour and a half was on his phone, doodling, not caring. And so when I left, I told the managing partner, I go, he shouldn't be managing people. I don't care if he's a partner or not. He's probably a great attorney, but you're doing yourself tremendous harm, because if he doesn't have an aspiration to learn how to be a better manager, well, there's nothing I can do to help him, right?
mm.
So it's learnable, but only if you are motivated to learn.
It strikes me that the last 18 months have been traumatic and turbulent for us all. And you mentioned at the start of this conversation that there's a necessity for a leadership model coming from a new paradigm. What's been the big lessons and the opportunities that are presented? Because it strikes me that people have been scared and that trust and togetherness has been fractured. And a little bit like your own background, Mark, where great gifts came out of adversity. Do you see any potential gifts or opportunity coming out of the pandemic for leaders and for the people that follow them?
You know, at the very end of my book, I wrote that I don't remember any of the goals we met or exceeded. Was it 10 million or 5 million or whatever? I don't remember any of that. What I remember, and what I still remember, are the people who reach out to me to say, the thank you for the impact you had. You believed in me, you taught me, you grew me, and I was able to go off and do great things because of that. So the cool thing is that the pandemic has given every leader in the world that opportunity. Do you want to influence people that way? And now you're being given permission, because people, when my book came out, many people just instinctively, oh, he must be a spiritualist or a religious nut or insane, somebody who doesn't get business.
Mm.
And they didn't understand that I've managed people this way and drove phenomenal performance this way. And it didn't matter if it was a man or a woman or whatever their age was or education. I had proved all that. But when you hear heart, you just go, oh, well, whoo, get rid of this guy. And I think what's happened now is that when we started managing, particularly in the year plus where people were working from home, that you couldn't operate without, like, my son. They had brand new twin babies right at the time that COVID hit, and a 5-year-old daughter who was supposed to start kindergarten, all in no mansion, so they're both trying to keep their jobs together, both trying to do their work, while having one kid do remote kindergarten and 2 other babies screaming while she's trying to study and they're trying to do their work. And I don't honestly know how they got through it. They're both self-employed, so they didn't have anybody to do what I'm talking about, what we're talking about. So they had to do it for each other, and they did it magnificently. But really, in the real world, where most people have bosses, the ones that made the difference to people were the ones to say, you got a mess going on right now, so you tell me what's a good time to talk, because I can tell right now with babies screaming, this isn't going to work for you. And how can I help you? Like, what are ways that I could create some flexibility, knowing that you're home with 3 kids, 2 babies, nobody can go out of the house? How can I help you? And this went there. And that's what people really wanted. And it's also what's driving the 30 million people to quit, because they were like, you know what? He didn't, or she didn't care about me the whole time. And I stepped up and I worked hard and I tried to balance it out. And I'm getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to work for 3 hours before my babies get up, and then till midnight while they're in bed, just to keep up with my work. And I can just tell this person doesn't care about me. And when you have that, it's like spiritually deflating. And it's binary. You just go, I can't deal with it. I just can't work like this anymore. And until COVID, people were willing to make it. They were willing to put up with it. They were willing to put up with bosses who didn't care. Never again, as far as I can tell.
The small things are not so small. And the second thing is, everything you're saying is easy to do, but it's also equally easy not to do.
We think it doesn't matter sometimes, or we rationalize that it doesn't matter, or we think, if I find out that your spouse has a health issue, and so I hear it from somebody else, and I go, well, if I mention it to Sean, he's going to tell me about it, and then I'm going to have to spend all this time, and I don't really have it, so I'm not going to mention it to you. So a few weeks go by, your wife's, in the hospital, and I don't say anything to you. At some point you go, you know what? All I really needed was for you to say, I'm thinking about your wife. I'm concerned about you both. And I just want to know if there's anything I can do to help you. Let me know. Obviously, I can't solve her health issue, but I can be there for you. That matters to people. And what did it take me to say that to you? 30 seconds, But by not making it, that's where we end up resenting people, and we become bitter, because after all this, you couldn't acknowledge what I'm going through in my personal life right now and offer some support, just offer some encouragement. And so I think it starts with, I care enough about you to express that to you, as opposed to if you're not here a year from now, I'm just going to have somebody else in there. Yeah. And if that's where you're at, you're never going to connect with people that way.
What advice would you give a young person trying to cultivate and develop their leadership capacity?
Be fair with people. Be completely open about what you're doing, so that if you make a decision, you can say, I made the decision because of these factors. So if somebody comes in and they go, well, but that factor, you could have gone a different way. You could have used that factor to make a different decision. Yes, I did, but that's how I chose to make it. So people understand that you're thoughtful in the way you're doing things. They're never going to always agree with you, but they understand how you got there, as opposed to feeling like, if I tell everybody what my decision was, I know I'm going to upset some people, so I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to implement it, and that we'll just move on. But that is what ends up alienating people the most, alienating managers, is when they're not transparent. So be thoughtful, hear from your people, ask them for feedback, make your decision, tell them how you made the decision, and then move on. The more transparent you are and the better communicator you are with people, letting them know what's going on. When you aren't communicating as a leader, people start to fantasize. They have a fantasy about what's going on, and it's usually bad. So if you're not communicating, if you're not saying, hey, I'm waiting for information from my boss before I make a decision, or I know you guys are all waiting to know whether we're going left or right, but I can't make that decision until I've had some time to think about it. And I'm going to make the decision next Monday. Now, people are like, fine, no problem, you know? But if you don't give them that communication, Sunday comes and they're like, am I going to get fired? You know, is this going to go bad for me? You know, what's he doing? You know, is this, you know, is there something I'm not seeing? And we start to go wobbling, and for no reason. And so the more communication, you know, I say in my speeches that I never let anybody go home on a Friday night not knowing where they stood. So, and most of the time people are standing very well. They're doing great performance. And so why would I ever want anybody wondering whether I liked them, cared about them, or was happy that they were working for me? So I would just say, hey, Sean, fantastic week. What a great hire you were. And people hear me say that and they go, oh, now they're going to get soft around the middle and take advantage of you because you've given away the state's evidence. You know, you basically told them you love them. And so if you love them, they're going to like not work for you. And that's not the effect at all. The effect is, I'm so grateful to that guy. Like, he just lifted me up by telling me that. You know, it's why I'm working my ass off for you. At least you can do is tell me you're pleased with it, you know? And so this is what I've learned, is just be thoughtful. Just be thoughtful and caring about people. And my operation was, even though I've since learned that the golden rule is really transcended by what's called the platinum rule, which is, instead of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, it's do unto others as they would have you do unto them, right? Yeah. So to the extent that you can figure out that, like, somebody needs a little extra love, give it to them. You know, don't think, oh, you know, I told them yesterday that they were doing a good job, so I don't need to do that today. That's stupid.
I sometimes say, Mark, that never ever overdose on appreciation or suffer the surplus of gratitude. So you're saying, don't be too mean with it. Give it out liberally.
Yeah. And I mean, I literally believe what you just said, that you cannot overdo it. You can't overdo it, you know, and people are working a 10-hour day. And if you said thank you once a day, and the funny thing is, you go up to managers and they say, you know, does appreciation matter? Oh yeah, it's so essential to my leadership success. And then you ask the people, like, when was the last time your boss thanked you? I don't know. Like, it's been a while, you know. And so there's this major disconnect, you know. So I'm just saying, you know, just you ask for a report and they get it to you, or you say, hey, you know, we were talking about something yesterday, and I can't remember what it was that you mentioned. Could you tell me that again? And they tell you, and you go, thank you. Like, that helped me, because now I don't need to worry about having to go dig for it. You remembered it. You got it to me. Now I can move on with what I'm doing. Thank you. Like, that helped me, as opposed to, okay, goodbye. Yeah. And it's so simple, but it's like, you want people to know that you're happy with them, that you're pleased with what they're doing for you. You're grateful. And all of this goes here. And this is the driving force of human performance, as far as I'm concerned.
It's like verbal sunshine.
That's a very Irish thing to say.
Mark, finally, the three words that are coming up for me in terms of your own leadership style are honesty, transparency, and authenticity. I'm wondering, Mark, is there one particular thing that you've learned along your leadership journey that's been long, pronounced, and varied and successful? Is there one thing that would have saved you a lot of hassle, a lot of mistakes to have known at the start of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, based on how I grew up, when I was a leader early on, I didn't trust myself. And so when I got the success, it almost seemed like, wow, I don't know how that happened, but like, like I'm lucky that it happened. I'm lucky that we met the goals, or that I pulled off an assignment or whatever. And I carried that on a really long time. So I always worked really hard. Deep down in my heart, I knew what I was doing, but intellectually, I was always sort of like worried that I wasn't measuring up. And that comes from being told you weren't measuring up, literally. So having the awareness that the voice that I carried in my head from my father for so many years wasn't true would have given me an even better edge. And I think forgiving yourself when you make mistakes, because that comes with it too. So being self-compassionate would have been a really good thing for me.
Was there a moment, Mark, that clicked in where you felt suddenly enough, that you actually accepted, you know what, I'm good at this, I'm no longer doubting myself? Or is that part and parcel of the role, of the journey?
No, well, it's my journey, right? So I had that beaten out of me for, growing up. 18 years of having your own father tell you that you're a worthless piece of shit and never going to amount to anything. But to have it come from an expression of hatred, disdain from your own father, that does great harm to you, right? So I started off at a tremendous disadvantage. But the sad truth is that I didn't really truly get over it until I started writing my book. Because as successful as I had been, and I had really great success in corporate America, corporate businesses, and managing very large teams and across the country, that kind of stuff. And so even with that kind of success, when I started to write the book, it was a slightly higher hurdle than I'd ever given myself. And I immediately went into, I'm not a writer. Other people have something meaningful to say. People are going to think my stories are stupid, right? And this was all my father's voice. And so because it was so paralyzing, there were days where I just couldn't do it. And days not just couldn't do it, but basically thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. This is too painful. I had somebody help me and point out to me that, first thing I learned was, this wasn't about you, right? And no one had ever mentioned that to me before. So when I'm hearing all that criticism from my father, my whole life, I just carried it forward, believing that was true of me. And her observation was, it's about him. It wasn't about you. You're not flawed as a human being. He was flawed as a human being, which is why he had to treat you that way. And those kinds of epiphanies, I just was sort of overwhelmed when I heard that, and thinking it would be nice if I had learned this much earlier in my life. But at least I learned it,
Mark, I'm so glad you prevailed, and your book is, it's the authenticity and transparency and honesty that I talked about that you exude is on every page of your book, and I'm so glad that you've written it.
Wow, thank you very, very much.
Well done, you, Mark. Go well and positively.
Thank you very much. Lovely meeting you, Sean.